The ancient sword on the alien planet defied all aliens. Until a human tried, the planet was called Carven, though no one remembered who had named it first. It was not beautiful in the way humans usually described beauty. The sky was pale silver, the land flat and dark, and the air always carried a faint vibration like a sound just below hearing. Many species had visited Carven, but none had stayed for long. They came for one reason only: the sword. It stood at the center of a wide stone plain, embedded in a tall pedestal of unknown material. The pedestal had no seams, no marks, no visible damage despite the passing of thousands of years. The sword itself looked simple, almost disappointingly so. A straight blade, slightly wider near the handle, dull gray in color. No gems, no glowing symbols, no visible power source. And yet it had defeated the galaxy. For over 3,000 standard cycles, the sword had resisted every attempt to move it. The strongest species had pulled with bodies built for gravity twice that of Carven. Nothing happened. The most advanced civilizations had used gravity manipulators, phase shifters, and reality anchors. The sword did not react. Energy-based life forms tried resonance alignment. The blade remained still. Eventually, the attempt stopped being hopeful and became traditional. Each major species sent representatives to try, not because they expected success, but because failing was part of galactic culture. The sword was a shared reminder that some things could not be taken, no matter how advanced one became. Scholars argued endlessly about its purpose. Some believed it was a weapon sealed away by a lost civilization. Others claimed it was a test. Many insisted it was nothing more than an ancient joke, left behind to waste the time of future species. Every theory collapsed under the same fact: the sword did not move. Above the plain, a research station floated silently. It was massive, built in layers to support different atmospheres and gravity needs. From its observation windows, dozens of beings watched the sword below. Today was different. A new species had arrived. They called themselves humans. The Galactic Council had debated humanity's inclusion for decades. Humans were young by interstellar standards. They had discovered faster-than-light travel only recently, and still argued among themselves about borders, beliefs, and priorities. Many older species viewed them as unstable, emotional, and inefficient. Still, humans were curious, very curious. That curiosity had brought them to Carven. Inside the station's main observation hall, representatives from 12 species gathered. Some were tall and thin with reflective skin. Others were compact and mechanical. A few existed as shifting light patterns within containment fields. At the center of the room stood a human delegation of 3. They looked small. No armored shells, no natural weapons. No visible enhancements. Just soft bodies, fabric clothing, and faces that showed too much emotion for most alien comfort. One of the senior researchers, a being known as Tessera of the Ninth Mind, addressed the room. "The relic has been explained to your species," Tessera said, voice translated into multiple formats. "You understand that every attempt to move the sword has failed." The lead human representative nodded. His name was Daniel Hargreave, a diplomatic envoy. "Yes," he said. "We've read the records, all of them." That caused a small ripple of surprise among the aliens. "All of them?" asked a crystalline being. "The archive spans centuries." Daniel smiled slightly. "We're good at reading long histories." Another alien spoke, its voice low and resonant. "Then you understand why this visit is unnecessary." Daniel did not argue. He simply gestured to the third human standing slightly behind him. "This is Mara Ives," he said. "She's not here to pull the sword." That sentence created more reaction than anything else he had said. "Not pull," Tessera repeated. Mara stepped forward. She was average height for a human, with dark hair tied back and simple clothes. She carried no tools, no scanners, no equipment at all. "I'm here to look," she said calmly. Several aliens exchanged confused signals. "Observation is already complete," one said. "The sword has been observed for millennia," Mara nodded. "You observed what it does when people try to take it." "I'm interested in what it does when they don't." Silence filled the hall. The idea seemed to confuse everyone equally. Tessera finally responded. "You believe the relic reacts to intention." "I believe," Mara said carefully, "that every attempt so far assumed the sword was something to be won." A low hum passed through the station as systems adjusted for rising interest levels. "You think we are wrong?" asked another delegate. "I think," Mara replied, that you may have been asking the wrong question." That statement was recorded immediately. Later, alone in a quiet observation room, Mara studied the sword through a wide window. No data overlays, no enhanced visuals, just her eyes. She noticed things others had dismissed. The pedestal was not perfectly centered on the plane. The ground around it showed faint patterns, worn not by erosion, but by movement, people walking in careful circles. The inscriptions carved near the base were uneven, not decorative. They looked like writing added over time. Not commands, responses. Most alien languages were precise, efficient, built for clarity. Human languages were different, messy, emotional, full of metaphor and contradiction. Mara suspected the inscriptions were not instructions but reflections, poetry. "That's why you missed it," she whispered. "You weren't listening for a voice." Behind her, Tessera observed quietly. "You believe the sword is aware," Tessera said. "I don't know," Mara replied. "But I think it remembers." The sword had not been designed for strength, or intelligence, or technology. It had been waiting for something else, and for the first time in thousands of years, it seemed that the galaxy might finally be ready to understand why it had never moved. Far below, on the silent plain, the sword remained perfectly still. But if anyone had been close enough, they might have noticed something new. The faint vibration in the air around it had changed, just slightly. As if something had finally been acknowledged, the change around the sword was small, almost nothing. Most species would have missed it, but humans were good at noticing small things. From the observation room, Mara Ives stood quietly, her hands behind her back. She did not speak. She did not move closer to the glass. She simply watched the sword and the space around it, letting her eyes adjust. The vibration in the air had shifted again. It was not stronger, it was not louder. It was different, like a rhythm that had found a new beat. Behind her, Tessera of the Ninth Mind remained still. Tessera had lived through 8 cognitive cycles, longer than most species could imagine. Tessera had seen empires rise, fail, and be forgotten, and yet this moment felt unfamiliar. "Explain," Tessera said at last. Mara did not turn around. "May I tell you a story instead?" That request alone was unusual. "Stories are inefficient," Tessera replied. Mara smiled faintly. "That's what makes them useful." Tessera considered this, then allowed it. "Proceed." Mara nodded. "On my home world, we have many old stories about objects like this. Swords in stones, doors that only open for certain people, tests left behind by those long gone." "You believe your myths are relevant," Tessera said. "I believe myths are records," Mara answered. "Just written in emotional language." She finally turned to face Tessera. "In almost every human story like this, the mistake is the same. Everyone believes the test is about strength." "And it is not?" Tessera asked. "No," Mara said. "It's about understanding why the test exists." Tessera processed this silently. Across the station, news of Mara's observations spread quickly. Delegates from other species began reviewing their own records again. Old footage, old data. Failed attempts that had been archived and forgotten. Patterns began to appear. Every species that approached the sword had done so with preparation meant to overcome resistance. Stronger tools, better machines, more authority. Even humility had been practiced, but it was still the humility of someone expecting to receive a reward. No one had approached the sword without intent to claim it. Later that cycle, a council meeting was called. The chamber was vast, designed to hold beings of many shapes and needs. Gravity shifted in zones. Atmospheres blended carefully. At the center stood a live projection of the sword on Carven, still embedded in its pedestal. Mara stood beside Daniel Hargreave, listening. "The human hypothesis," began a tall avian delegate, "suggests the relic is reactive to perception rather than action." "That is inaccurate," Daniel said politely. "We believe it is reactive to attitude." A murmur spread through the chamber. "Define attitude," asked a mechanical intelligence. Mara stepped forward. "How you think about something changes how you interact with it," she said simply. "If you see it as a prize, you try to take it. If you see it as a danger, you try to control it. But if you see it as a voice, you listen," finished Tessera, surprising many. All eyes turned. Tessera continued, "This concept is unusual, but not without merit." That was enough to shift the discussion. Permission was granted. Mara would be allowed to approach the sword directly. No tools, no force, no attempt to remove it, only observation and interaction. When Mara's transport descended toward the plane of Carven, she felt no excitement, only focus. The land below was silent and wide. The sword stood alone, unchanged in appearance. It looked small against the empty world. As Mara stepped onto the surface, the vibration in the air became more noticeable. Not uncomfortable, just present. She walked slowly. Each step felt important, though she could not explain why. She stopped several meters from the pedestal. The sword did not glow. It did not move. Myra took a breath and sat down on the ground. That single action caused a ripple across the monitoring stations. "She is not approaching," someone said. "She has stopped," another added. Myra placed her hands on her knees and looked at the sword like one might look at an old monument, with respect but not fear. "I know," she said aloud, her voice calm. "Everyone wanted something from you." The sword remained silent. "I don't," she continued. "I just want to understand why you're here." Time passed, minutes, then longer. Alien observers grew restless. Data streams showed no energy spikes, no reactions. Some began to doubt again. Then the air shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but Mara felt it, like a tension. She swallowed and kept her voice steady. "You waited a long time," she said. "That means whoever made you believed someone would come, eventually." The pedestal emitted a soft resonance, too low to be called sound. Mara did not move. "I think," she said slowly, "you were never meant to be taken by the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced." The resonance deepened slightly. "You were meant to be met." The inscriptions near the base of the pedestal began to change, not glowing but aligning. Symbols once scattered now formed clearer sequences. Across the galaxy, analysts froze in shock. The sword was responding, not to force, not to command, but to conversation. Mara stood carefully. She did not reach for the blade. Instead, she stepped to the side, giving it space. "I won't pull you," she said. "Not unless you ask." For the first time in recorded history, the sword shifted. Not upward, sideways, just enough to show that it could move. A message spread through every connected system. The sword was never stuck. It had been choosing. Mara felt tears form, though she did not fully understand why. "You were waiting for someone who would leave you where you are," she whispered. The vibration settled, calm and steady. Above in the observation stations, silence ruled. Humanity had not proven itself stronger or superior. They had proven themselves patient. And for the first time, the galaxy began to wonder how many other ancient mysteries had been failed, not because no one was worthy, but because no one had listened. Far below, the sword rested once more, not conquered. But no longer alone. Myra Ives stood a little distance from the sword, letting the vibrations of the pedestal calm around her. The movement of the blade was tiny, almost unnoticeable to any species watching from the stations above, but Myra had felt it clearly. It was not a challenge or a trap, it was a greeting. The alien delegates were restless. Messages flowed across the stations, updates filling screens and translating into strange symbols. They could not believe what they were seeing. The sword, after thousands of years, had finally responded to someone, not to power, not to clever tools, but to a simple human presence. "Why does it respond to her?" one of the crystalline delegates asked. Its voice was like glass scraping against metal. "It should be inert." "It has resisted all others," Tessera observed quietly. "Perhaps," Tessera said slowly, "we never truly understood the question." Mara, unaware of the alien discussion, crouched closer to the pedestal. She did not touch the sword, she simply observed. She looked at the inscriptions carved into the stone, worn by time and weather. No alien had translated them correctly. Every translation was literal, technical, or analytical. None had considered the subtle meanings behind the symbols, the pauses, the spacing, the patterns. Mara did not need machines. She needed understanding. She spoke softly. "Why do you wait? Why have you been here for so long?" Her voice carried across the windless plain. The words were simple, yet thoughtful. Unlike previous visitors, she did not demand an answer. She only asked. For hours, Mara remained near the sword. The aliens began to record everything. Every vibration, every shift of energy, every movement of the symbols on the pedestal. Nothing else had ever happened like this. Finally, she noticed a pattern. The inscriptions were not commands, they were statements. Observations, notes left by someone or something long ago. Each line described what had been tried and what had failed. But there was a subtle tone of hope threaded between the lines, not hope for strength or skill. Hope for understanding. Myra whispered aloud, more to herself than to anyone else. "It wants someone who asks, not someone who takes." Above her, the alien delegates argued. Some insisted this was absurd. "It is a test of power," said one mechanical intelligence. "There can be no other explanation." Others were more thoughtful. "Perhaps it is a test of thought," a gaseous being suggested. "Of intent, not strength." The room fell silent. It was rare for alien minds to admit they might have been wrong. Mara noticed that the pedestal responded subtly to her thoughts. The vibrations grew steady when she stopped trying to understand the sword with logic and instead listened to the rhythm of its presence. She realized the sword had not been created for the strongest, the cleverest, or the most skilled. It was created for the careful observer, the one who would notice small details and honor them. She spoke again. "I think you are waiting for someone who can see you, truly see you." The sword shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a nod. Mara's heart skipped a beat. She did not celebrate. She did not raise her hands in victory. She only watched. Meanwhile, alien scholars began analyzing every detail of her approach. They had expected humans to be naive, emotional, and impulsive. But here Mara was patient, observing, and speaking with respect rather than command. She did not try to impress the sword. She did not rush. She only tried to understand. Hours passed, and Mara took no notes. She did not scan the pedestal. She simply studied it with her own eyes, tracing the worn lines and curves of the inscriptions with her gaze. She imagined the hands that had carved them, the beings who had come before, and the reasons they had failed. In the stations above, arguments broke out. Many could not accept that a human, so young in galactic history, could understand something that the most advanced civilizations had failed to move. Some delegates insisted it must be coincidence. Others quietly wondered if humans had a quality they had never measured. Mara sensed the sword's presence more clearly now, not as an object but as a consciousness. Not alive in the way humans or aliens were alive, but aware, waiting, patient, curious. And above all, expecting the wrong approach from everyone else. The sword had waited for someone who would not assume power was the answer. "I will not disturb you," Mara whispered. "I only want to understand." Her words were calm, simple, respectful. She did not ask for a prize. She did not claim ownership. She did not even ask for permission. She asked only for understanding. Then she noticed something she had not seen before. The shadows cast by the pedestal formed patterns in the dirt around it. They were subtle, barely visible, but they shifted whenever she spoke. The lines were not random. They were a map, a guide, a puzzle that could not be solved with strength or technology. It required observation, patience, and care. Mara knelt closer to the pedestal, letting her eyes follow the patterns. She traced them slowly with her finger, careful not to touch the sword itself. The patterns seemed to react to her attention, aligning and shifting as if inviting her to continue. She spoke again. "You have been here for a long time, waiting for someone who sees." And the sword shifted slightly more. A faint hum resonated through the pedestal. No other species had ever heard it. No alien sensor had ever recorded it. It was subtle, gentle, like a heartbeat. From the observation station, Daniel Hargreaves spoke softly into his communicator. "She is doing something no one else has done. She is listening, not testing." Mara did not need to hear him. She already knew. Listening had always been her strength, that and patience. The wind on Carven remained still. The pale silver sky reflected no light, and yet Mara felt a warmth in the air, a quiet presence acknowledging her. "You waited for someone who would not try to take you," she whispered. "And I am here, but I will not take you." The sword vibrated slightly more, and the inscriptions shifted again. This time, Mara noticed something incredible. The worn patterns began to form shapes that had never appeared before, not symbols, images, scenes. Stories of beings who had failed not in strength but in understanding. Their attempts were recorded not as shame but as lessons. Each attempt, each failure, each misunderstanding was written on the pedestal like a history of thought itself. Mara's eyes widened. "You want to be remembered," she said softly. "Not conquered, not claimed, remembered." The vibrations became steady, a rhythm that could almost be called breathing. And Mara realized that she was not alone. The sword was aware of her presence. It was aware of her mind. It understood that she was not like the others. She spoke once more. "I am not here to disturb you. I am here to learn, to see, to understand." And for the first time in millennia, the sword responded fully. It shifted in the pedestal, aligning perfectly upright. The vibrations became warm, steady, like an acknowledgement of trust. Mara could not explain it, but she knew she had passed some silent test, not a test of strength, not a test of skill, a test of recognition and patience. From above, alien delegates watched in stunned silence. Machines that had recorded every failure could not comprehend what they were seeing. They had calculated, measured, and simulated everything, yet the simplest human approach, observation, patience, respect, had succeeded where all else had failed. Mara stood slowly. She did not touch the sword, she did not lift it. She only observed, letting it settle back into the pedestal as if to say, "You understand me. That is enough." And the aliens realized something that humans had known all along. There was more to success than power, more to understanding than technology, and more to the universe than their own arrogance had allowed them to see. For the first time, they looked at humans differently, not as weak, small, or primitive, but as a species capable of seeing what others could not. A species capable of listening. Myra whispered one final time, "You are not a prize, you are a story, and now I know your story." The wind on Carven stirred slightly, as if agreeing. The sword remained in its pedestal, immovable to all who sought to take it. But it was no longer lonely. For the first time, it had met a mind that could listen, and that mind belonged to a human. Myra Ives stood before the sword again, her eyes tracing every line, every shadow, every subtle change in the pedestal. It had been hours since she first approached, yet she felt no fatigue. She moved slowly, as if time itself had slowed to match her careful steps. The air above the plane vibrated faintly, responding to her presence like a quiet echo of thought. Daniel Hargreave and the other humans stayed behind at the observation transport, communicating with Mara only occasionally. She did not need guidance. She had learned something no one else had. The sword was not a prize, nor a test of strength. It was an entity that waited, not for force, but for recognition. Above the plane, alien delegates watched through their observation screens, disbelief painted on every face. For thousands of years, the sword had resisted every known species. Machines, energy, logic, brute strength, and diplomacy had all failed. And now a human, so young, so small in comparison, stood before it, interacting with nothing but patience and curiosity. Mara sat cross-legged a few meters from the pedestal. She did not touch the sword. She did not use tools, she did not scan it. She simply watched. The inscriptions, worn by centuries, were beginning to make sense, not as commands but as memories. Notes from those who had tried before, chronicling their attempts, their failures, their assumptions. Each line, Mara realized, was a story of misunderstanding. "I am not here to take you," Mara whispered softly, her voice barely carrying across the plane. "I am here to understand, that is all." The sword vibrated faintly, almost like a nod, a subtle acknowledgement. The aliens above exchanged messages, frantically recording every change. No one had ever observed the sword move in response to thought alone. The very idea challenged their understanding of physics, consciousness, and intention. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. She imagined the centuries of beings who had come before, each failing to recognize the sword's true nature. Some had tried force, some had tried machines, and some had tried rituals or authority. All had approached with desire or expectation, and all had failed. She opened her eyes and spoke again. "I see you. I see that you have waited for a long time. That is why you did not move for anyone else. You were waiting for someone who would not try to take you, someone who would not demand but who would listen." The vibration grew slightly stronger. Mara could feel it in her chest, a gentle resonance that pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She leaned forward slightly but did not touch the pedestal. She was careful to respect the space around the sword, as if that alone mattered more than any machine or strength. Above, Tessera of the Ninth Mind whispered to the other delegates, "She is not commanding it, she is engaging it." That is the difference. Many delegates nodded, though some were still skeptical. They could not imagine that something so simple could achieve what all others had failed to do. Mara's gaze traveled over the inscriptions again. She noticed small differences in the spacing of the symbols. They were not errors, they were intentional, subtle cues. "You are trying to communicate," she said. "I am listening." Time passed. The aliens began to understand the patience Mara was showing. They had spent millennia trying to dominate, conquer, or impress the sword. Mara was doing none of these things, and yet she was achieving what none of them had. It was a new kind of intelligence, different from their own. A kind that valued attention, care, and recognition. Mara spoke softly, letting her words carry into the still air. "You have been here so long, waiting for someone who could see beyond strength, someone who could recognize your purpose without trying to change it." The sword responded again. A tiny shift, a subtle movement along its length, not enough to lift it, not enough to pull it free, but enough to show that it was aware. The vibration resonated more strongly now, almost like a heartbeat. Mara felt a warmth in the air around her, a presence that was both ancient and patient. She leaned back and smiled faintly. "You have waited a long time, but I am here. I will not take you. I only wish to understand." Above, alien delegates whispered in disbelief. "It is responding to thought?" one asked. "It cannot be." Daniel Hargreaves' voice came over the communicator. "It is. She's engaging it in a way we never expected. It is aware." Mara did not respond. She simply watched. She let her mind align with the rhythm of the sword, noticing subtle changes in vibration, shadow, and resonance. It was as if the sword itself was speaking, not in words, but in movement, presence, and acknowledgement. Hours passed, and Mara remained calm, patient, and focused. The aliens were awestruck. They had studied the sword for thousands of years and understood nothing. Mara, a single human, was achieving what entire civilizations had failed to do. Not through power, not through intellect, not through advanced technology, but through observation, patience, and understanding. Finally, Mara rose slowly, her eyes still on the sword. "I understand now," she said softly. "You were never meant to be taken by those who seek to conquer. You were meant to meet someone who listens, someone who sees you as you are." The sword shifted again. The vibrations resonated in rhythm with Mara's heartbeat. The inscriptions aligned in patterns that had never appeared before. They were no longer just symbols. They were stories, histories of those who had tried before, chronicling failures and lessons. And now Mara understood them. "You are not a weapon," she whispered. "You are a memory, a story, and I see you." The alien delegates watched in stunned silence. Some tried to calculate what was happening. Others tried to rationalize it with their own systems. All failed. None of their tools or machines could explain what they were witnessing. Mara did not move closer. She did not reach for the sword. She merely stood, quiet, patient, and attentive. And the sword responded. The vibration in the air became steady, comforting, like a heartbeat. The inscriptions glowed faintly, highlighting the stories of those who had come before. Mara realized that the sword had been waiting, not for strength or skill, but for recognition. It had waited for someone who could see, truly see, its purpose and its history. Mara smiled faintly. "I will not disturb you. I only wanted to understand. That is enough." The sword shifted slightly more, settling perfectly upright. The vibration continued in gentle rhythm. It was an acknowledgement of trust, a recognition that someone had finally understood. Above, the alien delegates were silent. For the first time, they saw humans not as weak or primitive, but as capable of something they themselves could not achieve. Humans could observe, listen, and understand in ways others had overlooked. And that, they realized, was a strength greater than any machine, any power, or any ritual. Mara stood quietly for a moment longer, letting the sword settle. Then she turned and walked slowly back to her transport. She did not lift the sword. She did not claim it. She only observed, learned, and respected. Daniel Hargreave met her as she entered the transport. "Did it respond?" he asked softly. Mara nodded. "Yes, not to force, not to power, but to understanding." The transport lifted into the sky. The sword remained in its pedestal, immovable to all who sought to take it. But it was no longer alone. It had finally met a mind that could listen, a mind that could see. And that mind belonged to a human. For the first time, the sword's story was understood. And for the first time, the galaxy began to see humans differently. Not as conquerors, not as weaklings, but as beings capable of observation, patience, and respect, qualities that even the oldest civilizations had overlooked. Myra looked out the window at the sword, small but radiant in its stillness. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "You waited for a long time, but I understand now. That is enough." The alien delegates continued to watch in awe. For thousands of years, they had believed the sword could only be moved by strength. And now they understood that sometimes, understanding was stronger than any force. And Mara, a single human among millions, had proven it. Mara Ives had returned to the observation station, though she felt no distance between herself and the sword on Carven. The experience had left her calm, yet her mind was alive with questions. She had understood something no other species had before, but she did not yet understand everything. The sword had acknowledged her. It had shifted in response to her presence. It had shared its history silently, through vibrations, patterns, and subtle movement. But why humanity? Why had the centuries of other civilizations failed and a single human succeeded? Daniel Hargreave waited for her in the transport control room. "They want to know your thoughts," he said softly, gesturing to the live projection of the sword on the main screen. Every alien delegate watched, some impatient, some silent, some skeptical. Every species had believed the sword was a test of strength or skill, and now they were learning they had been wrong. Mara took a deep breath. "It is not a weapon," she said slowly. "It never was. It is a record, a memory, a guardian of knowledge, and it was waiting for someone who could see, truly see its purpose." She paused. "We humans, we approach the world differently. We listen, we observe, we notice small things that others ignore." Above the station, alien delegates murmured. Many found it hard to believe. Humans had only recently joined the galactic community, and yet one had achieved what thousands of years of observation, study, and effort could not. A tall, thin delegate with metallic skin addressed Mara. "You speak as if your species is unique in perception. That is impossible." Its voice hummed, flat and even. Mara shook her head. "Not impossible, just rare. Many species focus on power, on achievement, on measurement. Humans, we focus on meaning. We want to understand, not conquer. That is why I was able to connect with the sword." The aliens continued to watch silently. They had spent generations learning about everything: matter, energy, time, and space. And yet, a simple approach, patience, and care, qualities they had dismissed as weakness, had succeeded where all else failed. Mara stepped closer to the observation window, looking down at the sword. The soft vibrations that had greeted her were still present, steady, patient. She could sense a pattern now. The sword had not been waiting for the strongest, not for the cleverest, not for those who could bend reality or manipulate forces. It had been waiting for someone who could approach with empathy, someone who could recognize its history, its purpose, and its voice. Daniel whispered, "Do you think it knew we would come?" Mara did not respond immediately. She was thinking. "Perhaps it did," she said finally. "Or perhaps it only knew it would recognize someone who could listen. That could be anyone, but not everyone is willing to listen." The room grew quiet as Mara spoke. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Even the aliens could feel it. They began to understand something they had never realized. The sword had not rejected them because they were weak. It had rejected them because they had never asked the right question. They had tried to move it, to claim it, to prove themselves. But the sword had not wanted any of that. It had wanted recognition, understanding, patience, respect. A gaseous delegate hovered closer to the observation screen. "You claim that your species has a quality no others possess?" it asked. The question was not accusatory, only curious. Mara nodded. "Not unique, but overlooked. Humans fail often. We make mistakes. But we also notice patterns others ignore. We value empathy, connection, and meaning. That is why the sword responded to me. And perhaps why it would respond to other humans who seek understanding rather than conquest." The metallic delegate hummed. "You speak as though your species is ready for a challenge beyond your comprehension. That is unsettling." Mara smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is a reminder that strength alone is not enough. The universe is not conquered by force. It is understood by those willing to observe, learn, and respect." Above Carven, alien scholars reviewed centuries of records. Machines recalculated, translating failed attempts into new terms, seeing patterns they had never noticed. They realized the sword's true purpose. It had been created not to resist, but to teach. Every failure was a lesson, every misstep a warning. And now a human had passed the silent test. Back on the plane, Mara spoke softly to the sword. "I understand your purpose. You were never meant to be taken. You were meant to be understood." She paused, letting the words resonate. "And I will not disturb you. That is enough." The sword vibrated gently, a quiet acknowledgement. It did not rise from the pedestal. It did not glow. It did not respond in a dramatic way, but it had recognized her. It had chosen humanity, not for power, not for conquest, but for thoughtfulness, patience, and empathy. Daniel looked at Mara, astonished. "You did it. You actually did it." Mara shook her head. "No, I didn't do it. I only asked the right question." Above the station, the alien delegates began to speak in hushed tones. Their arguments changed. Where they had seen humans as weak, small, or reckless, they now saw something different. They saw a species capable of subtle thought, careful observation, and moral restraint. They saw a species that could succeed where the strongest had failed, not through force, but through understanding. Tessera spoke, her voice calm and reflective. It appears humans are not to be measured only by strength or technology. Perhaps their greatest power is perception. A mechanical intelligence analyzed the data streams and reported, "The sword's response correlates to human presence, not physical manipulation. This is unprecedented." Mara listened quietly, then spoke again. "The sword is a story. It holds history, lessons, and memory. It teaches that power alone is not enough. It waits for someone who can understand that." The alien delegates fell silent. Some felt shame at their arrogance. Others felt awe at the subtle power humans had demonstrated. None had ever considered that patience, observation, and respect could succeed where thousands of years of effort had failed. Mara's eyes returned to the sword. "You waited for someone who could listen, and I am here. That is enough." The sword vibrated once more, steadily and calmly, as if satisfied. The inscriptions glowed faintly in response, patterns aligning to tell the story of its creation, its purpose, and the centuries of attempts that had come before. Every symbol, every line, every curve told a story of patience, failure, and expectation. Mara understood that the sword had chosen humanity not because humans were stronger or smarter than other species. It had chosen them because they were willing to see what others had missed. They were willing to observe, to think, to empathize, and in that they were ready for something greater, understanding the universe, not just conquering it. Daniel finally spoke. "Do you think this changes how they will see humans?" Mara nodded. "It already has. They will see that we are not just new and inexperienced. They will see that we have a quality that matters in ways they did not expect. That is more important than any technology, power, or skill." The aliens continued to watch, slowly realizing that their assumptions had been wrong for centuries. The sword had never been a challenge of strength. It had been a challenge of perception, and humanity had passed it with quiet patience and understanding. Myra looked down at Carvin one last time before leaving the plane. The sword remained in its pedestal, immovable to all who sought to take it. But it was no longer lonely. It had met a mind that could see, recognize, and respect it, and that mind belonged to a human. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations began to reconsider what it meant to succeed. Perhaps victory was not always about power or skill. Perhaps victory could also mean understanding. And perhaps humans, though young and small, had already achieved that in ways no one else could. Myra whispered softly, "I understand you. I will remember you. That is enough." And above Carvin, in the vast observation stations, the delegates of 1,000 species began to see humans differently. Not as weak, not as reckless, not as unworthy, but as a species capable of thought, patience, and understanding. A species capable of seeing the universe in ways that even the oldest civilizations had missed. The sword remained in place, silent, patient, immovable, but it had chosen. And in its choice, it had quietly celebrated humanity. The news spread across the stars faster than any fleet or message could travel. A human had done what no other species could. A single human, Mara Ives, had approached the ancient sword on Carvin, not with force, not with clever machines, not with rituals of power, but with patience, observation, and understanding. And the sword had responded. At first, many species refused to believe it. The data was rechecked, recalculated, and simulated. Every attempt to disprove it failed. Even centuries of recorded failures could not explain what had happened. The sword had not moved for millennia, yet a human had caused it to respond. Not by lifting it, not by touching it, but by recognizing it. Delegates from countless civilizations gathered in their own councils. Images of Myra and the sword were displayed across holographic networks. Analysts argued endlessly. "It must be a coincidence," said one elder. "It cannot be mere humans who succeed where all others failed," another replied. But slowly, discussion shifted. Slowly, reality could not be denied. Humans had something unique, something unexpected. At the Galactic Council, Tessera of the Ninth Mind addressed the assembly, her voice carried across the chamber, calm and measured. "The sword on Carvin has never been a test of strength. It has been a test of perception, understanding, recognition. The human who approached it did not seek to conquer or control. She sought only to observe and to understand." Gasps and murmurs ran through the chamber. For centuries, species had measured strength, intelligence, and power. And yet here was a simple human, small, young, and unarmed, whose quiet patience had succeeded where empires had failed. One elder, a long-limbed being with translucent skin, leaned forward. "Are we to conclude," it asked slowly, "that we have misjudged our measurements of what is valuable? That observation, patience, and empathy are more effective than the tools and methods we have relied on for millennia?" Mara, present in a smaller chamber with Daniel and other human delegates, nodded. "That is exactly what happened. The sword responded because someone took the time to see it, not to claim it, not to use it, simply to understand it." Across the galaxy, young scholars of many species began to record Mara's approach in their studies. New disciplines were created. Instead of relying solely on power and calculation, species now explored patience, empathy, and observation as strategies for success. The way humans approached the world became a new standard, not because of violence or conquest, but because of insight. Meanwhile, the sword remained on Carven. It had not left its pedestal. It had not been claimed. And yet it had already changed the galaxy. No longer was it a symbol of failure. It was a symbol of possibility, a reminder that even the smallest or youngest could succeed where empires failed if they approached the challenge correctly. Mara herself returned to the observation station, sitting quietly by the window overlooking Carven. Daniel joined her. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked. Mara shook her head. "I only listened. I didn't do anything extraordinary. The sword chose to respond. I just asked the right questions." "But that is extraordinary," Daniel said. "Do you know how many civilizations have tried for centuries? They failed. You succeeded in hours." Mara smiled faintly. "Success is not about speed or force. It is about understanding. And that is what we humans do. Sometimes we fail, yes, but we also notice things that others ignore." News of the event reached leaders of countless civilizations. Political councils, academies, and think tanks debated the implications. Some feared that humans could become too influential. Others celebrated the potential for cooperation and insight. Entire species began reevaluating their strategies for exploration, diplomacy, and discovery. A tall, silver-skinned delegate approached Mara in a private council. "Your species, your approach is unfamiliar. You act without seeking control, yet you achieve results greater than those who control everything. How is this possible?" Mara considered the question carefully. "We humans are curious," she said. "We make mistakes, we explore, we ask questions. We do not always succeed, but we keep observing and learning. Sometimes that is more powerful than force or control." The delegate nodded slowly. "Perhaps our civilizations have been blind in our pursuit of strength and efficiency. We have overlooked observation, patience, and humility. Your species may teach us what we have ignored." Across the galaxy, scholars began analyzing the centuries of failures on Carven. Machines calculated every attempt, every vibration, every movement. And they discovered something remarkable. All previous species had approached with assumptions of control. Only a human had approached with recognition. The sword did not require conquest. It required understanding. This realization led to new philosophies. Empathy, observation, and patience became valued skills in schools, academies, and guilds of many species. Diplomatic strategies changed. Exploration missions were redesigned. The way species interacted with the universe began to shift. Back on the observation station, Mara and Daniel watched the sword silently through the viewing window. The pale silver sky of Carven reflected on the glass, and the blade rested in its pedestal, still and patient. Mara felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had not claimed the sword, she had not proven herself superior. She had only listened, and in doing so, she had changed the galaxy. "Do you think it will remember us?" Daniel asked. Mara smiled softly. "It doesn't need to. It responded once, and that is enough. It has shared its story, its lessons. That is what matters." Above Carven, alien delegates continued to discuss, analyze, and debate. Some admitted their errors, others quietly admired humanity. The small species, underestimated for centuries, had shown that success could come from attention, patience, and understanding. And slowly, quietly, the galaxy began to change. Policies shifted. Exploration missions were designed with observation as much as technology. Diplomats began to value listening as much as negotiation. Even warriors, long trained in strength and strategy, began to respect insight over power. The sword on Carven remained where it had always been. It did not rise, it did not glow, and it did not leave. But it had fulfilled its purpose. It had waited for a species capable of listening. It had chosen a human, and through that choice it had changed the galaxy forever. Mara looked down at the pedestal one last time before leaving the observation station. The air above the plane vibrated faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence, of her patience, of her understanding. The sword did not move again. It did not need to. Its lesson had been taught. Daniel watched her with awe. "I think the galaxy will never see us the same way again," he said. Mara nodded. "Perhaps, but that is not why we did this. We didn't approach the sword to impress anyone. We approached it to understand, that is all." As the transport lifted away from Carven, the stars stretched in all directions. Mara looked at the distant constellations and thought of the countless civilizations that would now reevaluate their assumptions. Strength and technology were not always the answer. Observation, patience, and understanding could achieve what force never could. And somewhere in the quiet of the pedestal the sword remained, patient, immovable, and satisfied for the first time in millennia. It had met a species capable of listening. It had chosen humanity. And in doing so, it had quietly begun a transformation of the galaxy, one that would be remembered for generations to come. The stars above Carven were still and silent. The pale silver sky stretched endlessly, reflecting the quiet plains below. And in the center of it all, the sword remained in its pedestal, immovable, patient, and now understood. Mara Ives stood at the observation window of the station once more, looking down at the blade. The vibrations she had felt days ago were still faintly present, like a heartbeat hidden beneath centuries of silence. She did not need to touch it. She did not need to lift it. She had already met it with understanding, and that was enough. Daniel Hargreave joined her, carrying a small data pad. "The reports are coming in," he said softly. "Scholars across the galaxy are analyzing what you did. It's already changing their perspective on every ancient relic they've ever found." Mara nodded. "I never wanted to prove anything. I just wanted to understand. That's all the sword needed." Across the galaxy, species reevaluated what they had always believed. Libraries of alien knowledge, which had long relied on measurements of power, logic, or technological achievement, now included chapters on perception, patience, and empathy. Scholars studied human methods of observation and reflection, wondering how a young, unarmed species had succeeded where millennia of effort had failed. The silver-skinned delegate that had questioned Mara months ago spoke to the council again. "Humans," it said slowly, "have demonstrated a quality we have overlooked. They do not conquer blindly. They do not rely solely on power. They observe, they reflect, and they understand. And through this, they succeed in ways we never imagined." In time, a new philosophy emerged. Across the stars, teachers told the story of Carven and the sword. They described how humans had approached without instruments, without force, and without expectation. They listened. They asked questions. They respected history and purpose. And in doing so, they achieved what others could not. Mara's example became a lesson for explorers, diplomats, and scholars alike. Young beings of every species were encouraged to observe carefully, to notice patterns, to respect the unknown, and to consider the intentions behind the mysteries they encountered. Back on Carven, the sword had returned to its quiet state. It did not rise. It did not glow. It did not need to. Its purpose had been fulfilled. It had waited for someone capable of understanding, and that someone had come. A human. And that choice would echo across the galaxy for centuries. Mara stood alone at the observation window, thinking about the centuries of failed attempts. Powerful empires, brilliant minds, and vast machines had all tried to move the blade, and all had failed. Why? Because they had assumed power was the answer. They had assumed dominance, skill, or technology could succeed. No one had asked the right question. "What does this object need from me?" She whispered to herself. It was never about strength. It was about recognition, listening. Daniel stood quietly behind her. "Do you think it will remember us?" he asked. Mara shook her head. "It doesn't need to. It only needed to be understood once. That understanding has already changed the galaxy. That is enough." And indeed, it was enough. Far across the stars, ambassadors, scholars, and explorers carried the story of the unlifted sword. They marveled at the patience and insight of humanity. They debated the lesson it taught, that the smallest, youngest, and seemingly weakest could achieve the impossible when they approached with understanding rather than dominance. The sword itself became a symbol, not of conquest, not of power, not of failure, but of recognition. Observation, patience, A reminder that sometimes the greatest strength was not in taking, but in seeing, listening, and understanding. For humanity, the legacy was profound. They were no longer seen as a minor species, untested and inexperienced. They were recognized as capable of insight, empathy, and wisdom. Their approach to exploration, diplomacy, and learning became admired across countless civilizations. And Mara Ives, quiet and unassuming, had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve. Back on Carven, the sword remained embedded in its pedestal. Travelers would continue to come, curious about the legendary blade that no one could lift. But Mara had taught the galaxy that success did not require lifting it. Success required listening, understanding, and respect. The winds over the plains of Carven stirred softly, carrying the faint vibration of the blade. It was not lonely anymore. It had been recognized. It had shared its story. And it had quietly chosen humanity, not for power, not for skill, but for perception, patience, and insight. Mara and Daniel left the observation deck together. "Do you think they'll try to lift it again?" Daniel asked. "Some will," Mara said, "and they will fail. But others might learn what I did, and that is what matters." Years passed. Humanity continued to explore the galaxy, carrying the lesson of Carven in every mission. They approached ancient artifacts with care, listened to civilizations they did not yet understand, and valued observation above domination. Across countless worlds, humans became known not as the strongest, but as the species capable of seeing what others overlooked. And the sword on Carven waited, patient, quiet, and still. It did not need to move again. Its story had been told. Its lesson had been learned. Its legacy, carried by a single human and by humanity as a whole, would endure across the stars for generations. Myra stood one last time at the observation window, watching the blade. "You have waited a long time," she whispered softly. "But now you are understood." The sword remained in place, immovable to all who sought it, but no longer alone, no longer ignored. Its voice, once silent for millennia, had been heard, and in hearing it, humanity had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. The stars above Carven twinkled quietly, endless and patient, reflecting a truth the galaxy would never forget. Sometimes the greatest victory is understanding, and sometimes the smallest and most unassuming beings carry the power to change everything. Myra smiled faintly, her eyes lingering on the sword. "That is enough," she said, and it was.